Hello lovely people, I'm K3N, welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to show you how I make my Japanese rice bag inspired little bags. So before we get into it, I thought I'd get the cat hair off it first. Sorry. I thought I'd just give you an overview of the basic construction. So in principle it's a little box which is made up, if I open it up you'll see more easily, which is made up of 5 squares. So you've got 4 squares around the side and then 1 square for the bottom. So we do an outer box and an inner box, which is the lining. And then between the 2 layers we trap the little loops and we put the drawstrings in. Simples, right? Okay, so you could just make it from 5 squares of, 1 piece of fabric per square. But in order to make it a little bit more interesting, I thought I'd do 4 patch. So, a 4 patch. If you're a patchworker, quilter type person, you'll know exactly how to make a 4 patch, so feel free to fast forward. Otherwise, I'm going to show you how I do it when I do it by hand. So I've decided that the sides of my bag, my squares, are going to be 5 inches square. So that would be 2 times 2.5 inch squares. That's obvious. So I've made myself this little template. In fact, I've used it quite a lot. It's just a bit of, envelope cardboardy stuff. And then simply what I do is I just put that on my bit of cloth, which I've here prepared in advance, but I just put it on my bit of cloth and I take a pencil and I just use a normal pencil. This is a cheapie, I can't remember where it came from, but it's a soft one, it's a 4B. But you do need a sharp point because if it's blunt you get a thick line. Now I must apologise in advance, the minute I start doing kind of conventional patchworky type stuff, my years of finicityness come up to the fore. So I'll try and keep the finicityness to a minimum because I very much want this to be in the spirit of slow stitch and the process and so on. But I do apologise if I start obsessively pinning and lining things up. So yeah, back to where I was. You draw around your square and then you cut out and you leave somewhere in the region of 1/4 inch all around. So that's that. And you'll need, for 4 squares of 4 patches, you need 16 in total. And I've gone for this indigo dyed fabric. This is actually not indigo dyed, well, not by me and not organically. It's just a bit of old shirt, but it's the right colour. And this mustardy yellow in various types of fabric. So what I do then is I put them right sides together, and here comes the obsessive pinning. This is just a little trick because I often do this on my lap and I use all kinds of random scraps and I draw around them. And the seam allowance, and I just cut them or tear them, so the seam allowances are never accurate. So I do this pinning. I go through there with the pin, that's the point, whoops, I dropped the pin, start again. That's the point where the 2 lines meet. And then sort of vertically through. I hope the camera can pick this up. And then I come through the point, the same point on the other square. And I leave that pin hanging like that for a minute. Then I go to the other corner and do exactly the same thing. There we go. So it's literally just hanging on those 2 pins. And then I kind of get hold of it like so with the pins between my fingers. And just give it a little gentle tug, don't be rough with it. And then I get another 3rd pin and pin somewhere halfway along. And then I hold my breath and look on the other side and go, yeah, it's on the line. So that's now held. Now I wouldn't now turn those pins because you'll push everything out of alignment. See, I really fight this desire, but I can't, It makes me unhappy if points don't match when they should, so I fiddle. I'm sorry. If you don't want to fiddle and you don't care about your points not matching, don't, feel free to, you do you, like I always say. So I take the pins out and turn them, and there, that's all pinned and lined up front and back, regardless of, you see the seam allowances are not matching, it doesn't matter. And then I'm just going to get that pin out again and do a little line of running stitches. I've got a knot. I always start when I'm piecing, especially with a knot and a back stitch. And I'm not sewing into the seam allowances, I'm just sewing on my drawn line. So I'll just whip along there really quick. Well, I shouldn't do it quickly, should I? I should do it slowly. I quite like piecing. It's very zen to me, especially if you use all kinds of little scraps and you're just picking a couple of scraps at a time and sewing them together, and just that kind of making it up as you go along type piece. I've made whole quilts that way. So we're nearly to the other side. I wouldn't normally take 2 stitches at once, but I don't know why I feel a bit rushy. I feel a bit rushy. You have to just slow yourself down, take a breath. Right, so I'm at the other corner. I'll do another little couple of back stitches probably. That's not helpful. And then snip. Still not helpful. Leaving a little tail. I always leave a little tail, it's less likely to pull out, I think and hope. So that's that little pair joined together in perfect harmony. Cue for a song about teaching the world to sing. Okay, now I digress. So now I'm going to join these two together, checkerboard styley. And in order to do that, I'm going to press both seams, or I'm not going to press, you could press them with an iron if you wanted to, but I'm not gonna. I'm just going to push them over so that, do you see they're both towards the blue? Could be both towards the yellow, it doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to put them right sides together, the right way around, see, so they're like that. And then, because those seams are going opposite ways, they'll kind of lock into each other. So you won't get a great big fat layer of 4 fabrics in one spot. And then I'm going to go with my pin again, I'm sorry, I can't stop myself, through that point of this yellow square, through that point, the same point on the blue square. And I'm going to do exactly the same process as before, only this time I'm doing in the middle and the 2 ends. So through the point, and I'm kind of feeding the needle onto, feeding the fabric onto the pin. Seems to go more easily that way. Through, not through my finger, and through where the point would be if my lines were straight. Okay. And then I'm going to do them one side at a time, so I'm going to hold the 2 pins again. Just give it a little tug, put it through, and I'm on the line. And then I'll get this pin out and put it back in. And I'll go and do the same thing the other side. On the line, as if by magic. Now here I'm going to make sure I pin with those seam allowances where I want them. So I'm going to put them where I want them. One going one way, one the other. Get that pin out, come out. I'm pinning there. More or less on the line. And I'm just going to put that pin away because I'm straight away going to... I don't need you, pin cushion, you stay over there. Oop. And now I've made you rock and roll, I'm sorry. Beep. And now I'm going to sew along there. Exactly the same way as before. Whoops. Back stitch. What's happened now? Oh, that's all right. See how strong that back stitch is? I can't even pull the knot through, so the knot is in fact redundant, but I'm just in the habit of knotting. Stop tutting. I hope the microphone doesn't make the tut sound like a really loud thing and make you all jump and spill your coffee or your tea or whatever it is you may or may not be drinking. Now, when you come to the middle where those seam allowances are, it is important, well, you know, important. It's not earth-shatteringly important, but it's if you want matching points in the middle and you want everything to lie nice and flat, it's important that you don't sew through your seam allowances. If those things don't matter to you, then it doesn't matter. So anyway, what I'm going to do in my finickety, quilty, patchworky mode is push that seam allowance over there, I'm assuming that some of you may never have done patchworky piecing. If all of you have, and I'm just, you know, showing you this for nothing, then I apologise. And then, see, I'm right into the end, this point here, and I'm just going to do another little back stitch. But I'm not sewing any seam allowances. Now I'm going to sneak through the base of that seam allowance to come out the other side. Do you see that? And then I'm going to get the seam allowances both going the other way, and just hold them there so I don't sew them. And I'm going to whip along here to the end. And it's gone quiet. It's gone quiet. She's not speaking. Now she is speaking. Ironically, she's telling us she's not speaking, which means she's speaking. Okay. So when I get to the, not the end, but you know, the end of the line, I'll finish off again. And I'll show you the next bit. Cut that off, snip. Oh, before I get to the next bit, number one, I'll show you that my middle's not too bad. So if you want to go and press this with an iron, again, I probably would if I was just doing this, you know, on my Todd. But you want to get all your seam allowances all going in the same direction, like a little windmill. You see, that one wants to go that way because we pressed him that way, but now we want him to go that way. And I'll show you why. I'm just going to finger press. Actually, that bit of shirt has got some lycra in it or something of some kind. I feel it because it doesn't want to crease nicely, but we'll make it behave. So if you get them all going, you see, like a little windmill, big fat fingers out the way, you get in the middle this cuteness. Look at this. A little teeny tiny 4-patch, which is, you know, it's going to be covered up in this instance, but what it does mean is it all lays nice and flat. So there's a rather wonky 4-patch around the edges, but none of that matters. So the next thing is, luckily for you, I've prepared all the others already, is, so this is going to be the base of my bag, which is my bit of, it's a bit of napkin that I bought somewhere that had been tie-dyed. And this, I've just stitched on that, just randomly around the circle and a little bit round there, because on the back I've put these bits of, it's quilter's wadding. I had some little scraps. You see they weren't big enough. In fact, I think that's even 2 different kinds of wadding now I look at it under the light. And I just zigzagged them together on my sewing machine. I had 2 long strips, narrow strips, and I just put a zigzag stitch all the way along. If you haven't got a sewing machine, you could also just do it by hand. Just, you know, go back and forth with some biggish stitches just to hold it together. And then from that I've cut 5-inch squares, which are the finished size of the sides of my bag. So I got 5 of those. So I've sewn that to it. Basically, you're just quilting it. You can do whatever you like, whatever fabric you choose. You know, whatever stitching. I've just done one little circle in the middle around the tie-dye and another line, you see it better on the back maybe, another line of stitching, just sort of a 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the wadding. The reason I've stayed from the edge is because this is seam allowance, so that'll go away once it's joined together, and then all you'll see is that, you see? So if I'd gone right on the edge, it wouldn't have been as nice. So that's my base, and then my 4 sides. Well, the 3 that I've already done exactly the same way. My bit of wadding, my 4-patch, and I've just done stitching again around each square, a little bit away from the seam, 1/4 of an inch-ish. When you come to stitch the outside, remember again, 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the wadding, because if you go 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of here, when you join it together in a bit, your lovely decorative stitching will be into the seam. So this one I've just finished. Just lay that down wrong side up. Sorry, I keep getting bits of, I've got a fluffy jumper on. See my fluffy jumper? Fluffy rainbow jumper that I made. She said proudly, I love this jumper. And it keeps sticking to the thread. Anyway, so here's my other bit of, you know, you see my zigzagged The cat's obviously been in my little basket where I kept all this. I just zigzag 2 bits together. So I'm just going to lay that on there and make sure I've got some seam allowance of some description around the edges, and turn him over, and I'm going to put a pin in the middle of each little square just to hold it together. Go back in your saucer. Like that. And then I could not find the gold that I stitched all around those with. So I thought, well, let's just go with red. Rather than trying to match it and it being not quite the same, I always find it more pleasing to just go with a completely different colour. And then it looks like you did it on purpose. And then I just come up and I'm going to start in the middle. And I'm going to do this square, and 2 reasons. One, when you quilt in general you start in the middle and work out. I mean, it doesn't matter really on these little things, but that's the principle, because then you push anything that's not laying flat, you push towards the edge. But the other reason is I can go all the way around this one, and then I can hop over there and do this one, and so on. So, now what happened there? What happened? I don't have a... Well, I did have a knot, but it didn't do its job. Naughty knot. Let's try again. So I just come through from the back. Yes, the knot holds. And then I just do some stitching like that. You get the idea of that. You get the idea of that? So I can finish that in a minute. Just round and round and round. The same as that. Okay, so then the next thing, actually we'll keep that here just for demonstration purposes. The next thing you need to do is join these into your box for the outside of your bag. So I lay the middle, the base down like that, making sure it's in shot, and then give myself some room. And then you lay these. Now imagine you've got a box and you've exploded it, you know, like that. So then you want its 4 sides like that. Now, if you've gone with the checkerboard 4 patchy type thing, you don't want this, because when these 2 are joined, do you see? You've got blue to blue and yellow to yellow. You want them like that. Do you see? I do struggle sometimes with making 2-dimensional into 3-dimensional in my brain, so it helps me if I go, yeah, that's right. See, now that's wrong. It used to be like that. So it goes blue, yellow, blue, yellow, blue, yellow, blue, and so on. So the first line I sew is I join each side to the base. So the first seam I'm going to sew is this one. Now I always leave things laid out and pick up, sew, put back. If I start picking it up and, you know, folding it all up together and sitting with it in a pile, I'm bound to go wrong. So I always leave it laid out, but you know, you don't have to do that if you've got better spatial awareness than I have. I pin in exactly the same way. This time I'm using the corner of the wadding as a guide. So I pin there. And a pin there. Beep. Again, if you've cut accurate seam allowances, you know, if you've got rotary cutters and rulers and all that kind of thing, then you don't need to do all this. You can just match up the seam and sew along the line. But my seam allowances are rubbish, so I've had to do my finickety pinning. But do you know what? I quite like my finickety pinning. I like it. I don't know why. Makes me happy. So, and then you just sew along there. And this thread is not behaving this morning. Tie a knot, and you just sew along that one edge. Again, not. I'm telling the thread to knot. But what I was actually going to say was not into the seam allowances. Just from the point of the wadding. Back stitch to start. Especially with when you're making bags and things like that. it's important that your sewing holds up for, you know, at least a little while before things start to fall to pieces. Hopefully they won't. And pincushion closer. I'm not going to do all of them on camera and bore you all rigid. I'm just going to do this one and the start of the second one, just because I want you to see what happens at the corner. So I'm going to whip along real quick, speedy, speedy. This is real running stitch, not walking stitch. At this point I'm not worrying about the seam allowances, I'm just stitching straight on through because it's not matching anything underneath. If you'd done a 4-patch bottom as well, which, you know, you could do, I'm not going to stop you, then you would need to, at that junction, make sure you're you know, another opportunity to fiddle about with pins. So when you get to the end of the line, again I do a back stitch. It's a little knot, naughty. We have those days, you know, when your thread just, there we go. And do a little back stitch. And I'm going to park that needle there just for a minute. Lay it down, make sure it's right. Make sure it's right. So now I'm going to do this one because my needle's here. So just pick that one up, turn, same pinning as before, through the point, through that point. Maybe I should subtitle this video, How to Make a Japanese Rice Bag, also known as How to Do Obsessive Pinning. That point. Get them like that. Get them so they're perpendicular. Little tug, pin the middle. Check it's, yeah, look, see? See? It is, you know. I don't know why I like it, but I do. Let's get that pin out and just put that a little bit further along so it's not in my way. So now, where are you? My needle's there. It's a teeny tiny needle. Right. So now my needle's over here and I obviously want to be here. So I'm just going to sneak through that seam allowance. Can you see that? I'm just going to sneak through there so that I come out in the right place there. And then I'm going to sneak back through here onto the front of my work. You see that? So I did a little round the houses. And you've guessed it, I'm going to do a back stitch. And then I'm just going to sew along like that. And I can stop there because you get the idea, I'm pretty sure. In fact, I have every confidence in you. So, do you see now? Which way does that go? I don't know. There. So, you see here, you'll have this weird stuff going on in the corners. If you're new to piecing things into corners, you might worry about that, but don't. I promise you that will be sorted out when we sew up the sides. So I'm going to go away and finish sewing here, here and here, and when I got my cross I'll come back and show you the next stage. Okay, so I've got my 4 side pieces all joined to my bottom piece, so I've got my little cross. So now the next thing is to join up the sides. So I'm going to pick it up and try not to get it so far in your face that you can't see. I'm going to turn, sorry, behave yourself. I'm going to match one of the corners of the 2 sides, right sides together. Get it in shot, do it again, okay? So I've picked it up and I want to make this seam here. So I want to do it right sides together, so I'm going to turn it like this. You see, so this is the bottom and these are my 2 sides. And I'm going to make sure everything's up out of the way here, this bottom piece. We're not dealing with that anymore. And I want to join this side seam. So I'm going to do exactly the same pinning technique. So through that corner and through this corner, whoops, to the point of the wadding. Do you see there I've got hardly any seam allowance? I'm slightly concerned when I come to do that, but you know. If it doesn't work, I'll just sew something else over it, because that's the way I roll. There we go. Now, because again you're joining your 4 patches, if you've gone with the 4 patch option, you've got a junction here of your seam allowances, so exactly the same principle as before. You want them to nest against each other. Can you see that? So they're nesting in there, they're not overlapping there, they're butting up. And then go through with a pin. Yeah, we're on the edge of the wadding. So I'm going to turn that pin. That's okay. They're nested. Do you see? Can you see that? That they're nested? Something's not right there. Do you see? That's completely not matching. But I'm going to give it a little tug and make it match. I'm the boss of you. Yep. That matches. I'm the boss of you. And then back over to this corner where we're going to start the seam. I always start in the corner and go up. Don't know why. And the same thing, but you really need to make sure that you keep all that, the rest of that out of the way. You're only dealing with this seam here, so go through there. If you're lucky, because you've already sewn the bottom seam, yeah, well, nearly lucky. Got it. I'm fiddling about a lot. This is because I come from a background of, you know, proper quilting, so it's still in me, this desire to have everything matching and as accurate as I can get it. But if it's not something that bothers you, then you don't have to fuss about as much as I am here. Right, I'm going to move this pin. I'm going to put another pin just because I can't help myself. Okay, so I've got that all pinned. You see those seam allowances. Got my thread. I'm going to make sure, because it has happened to me that that's been pushed in and I've accidentally caught it. So again, make sure that's up out of the way. And I'm going to get that pin away because he's now in my way. Right into that corner point, only catching these two. Have I said that enough times? And I'm going to do a back stitch, as always, at the beginning of a seam. In fact, I might even do 2. I don't know why. And then I'm going to sew that seam all the way up with teeny tiny running stitches. I do know that there are people, when they piece, they might take a couple of stitches forward and then a back stitch as they go along. I've never really got into the habit of doing that, but I have seen people doing that and make it more secure. And yeah, well, basically it's, you know, it's more of the same. There's nothing new, there's nothing different. I'm just going to stitch all the way up to this point, not going to stitch into the seam allowance, and then I'm going to do my back stitch, finish off, and then I'm going to go and do exactly the same thing with all my 4 sides, so that I end up with a box, which will be inside out at this point, and then I'll be back. Okay. Okay, so I've made my little box. All the sides are sewn up, loose thread. And there's one final thing I do with the outer before I move on to the lining, and I've already begun to do it. I've turned the top seam allowance over. Now, again, I can pretend I've done this deliberately as a warning. See how teeny tiny my seam allowances are? I think it's because, making excuses for myself again, I reuse some squares that I'd cut for another project, but you know, do try and make sure that your seam allowances are a bit more generous than that. Somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch would have been better. So all I'm doing, I've just left the last bit so I can just show you, although it's fairly, when you don't get a knot in your thread straight away. Excuse me. Is turning it down as I go. If you want to pin it first, you know, you go for it. And I'm stitching only into my wadding. I don't want these stitches to show on the outside. So I'm just going to stitch all the way around. And it's not strictly necessary to do this, but when you put the lining in, it just means it's one less thing you have to control and worry about. So it won't take you very long just to whip round. And this is, you know, process, focus, slow stitch after all, so we shouldn't mind doing a bit of extra sewing. Now when I come here to the side seam, the junction, I'm going to open that seam up just so it's not too bulky, and just fiddle about. There we go. Actually, I'm going to, you see there, I'm going to do an extra stitch, a back stitch. I keep doing back stitches everywhere. Nearly to the end. Oops. Gone quiet. Nearly there. Can't think of anything to say, that's rare for me. Okay, I'm at the end. And finish off with a back stitch or two. And what you can do as well is you can pull your thread nearly all the way through and then put your needle through it twice and then pull it up, and that makes a kind of pseudo knot. And then instead of cutting the thread off there, what I usually do is run it through somewhere, and again only into the wadding or not through the back, I hope, and then snip it off down there. So that's the outer all done. And so now I'll set that aside for a minute while I move on to the lining, and you'll see I have already done something. With my funky tie-dyed napkin. Now when I cut these pieces, because of my dodgy seam allowances there, I've left a 1/2 inch. You see my pencil line? So because I wanted a 5-inch finished square, I cut these 6 inches and tried to be a bit more accurate. So all I've done so far here is exactly the same as we did with the outer. I've just made my cross and stitched these 3 sides on. So I'll just set that aside for now, because this 4th one I have not yet attached, because I want to do a little pocket on it. And I do pockets all different kinds of ways depending on how the mood takes me. Inside this one I had this lovely bit of linen with this frayed edge. Can you see that lovely frayedness? So I put a bit of indigo on the outside and I left that raw edge on the inside, and I turned it under and I whip stitched it on. That's how I did that one. And there are 2 little square pockets in there, one each side. And I stitched some blue there and some red there. What usually happens is I do that and then I come back to that another day and I can't find the same thread, so it ends up a different colour. And this one, this has lovely memories for me. This was a day I spent mark making with a friend in England with some ink on cotton. And with my bits of fabric that I printed, I did my mark making on. I made this bag. But for the pocket, what I'm really talking about is I just folded a piece in half, whip stitched, tucked the edges in because it was quite frayy, not in a nice way, and whip stitched the pocket closed, the edge, and then I just stitched it on with this red. So it's only these red stitches that are holding it on. And that's just one triangularish pocket because that was the bit of fabric that I had. So for this little beast, here's my one side. I've just got a bit of indigo, and it's, I think it's 4 inches by 8 inches. I just tore it, but it's somewhere around there. And I'm not going to turn edges in or anything. I'm just going to do it, quick and easy. And I'm going to just crease it like that. I could have done a single layer, but it's quite thin, so I thought I'd double it up. And I'm just going to centre it somewhat. Remember you've got your seam allowance here, and all round, so you don't want to be in that with your pocket. So I'm just going to put it centre-ish, and I'm going to stick a couple of pins in it, somewhere in the middle. So it's roughly straight. And I'm just going to simply, with this gold, obviously, not obviously, I'm using the fold as the opening of the pocket, just because it's more sturdy. And I'm just going to do a running stitch around the edge, just to hold it on there, tuck my tail in. And try and keep it. Actually, this is a really horrible needle. Well, it's not horrible, it's just too, it's not the right needle for the job, it's too fat. So I'm just going to stay, you know, an even distance, about 1/4 of an inch or a bit less. Checking that I'm flat. That's my pocket sewn on. At the beginning I should have, what I usually do is take a couple of extra stitches, and I actually forgot to do that, so I went back and did it at the end. I edited out, I will edit out the 10 minutes it took me, not 10 minutes, but you know. So just a couple of stitches over at the edge there, because that's what takes the strain. So now that little piece is ready to join his friends. So we're going back to the cross. Now do check and double check, because I've done this, that you do not attach it with the pocket pointing down into the inside of the bag. You need your pocket opening what will be where the top of the bag will be. And I'm going to just do same as before with the pinning and the sewing. Whoops, just cut my fingernails and now I can't pick pins up. Through the corners, through the corners. And I'm going to sew this seam. I'm sorry, I really thought I got rid of this croak, because I watched back the last stage just to check where I was up to, so that I could make a sensible join into the next stage. And I heard myself going all the time and sniffing, and I'm so sorry. I thought it was gone. On the line, so I'm going to sew this seam, and then when I've done that, I'm going to sew the sides up in exactly the same way as I did for the outer. So I'll stop the camera, I'll go away and do that, and then I'll come back for the last bits of putting it all together. There we go, so my lining is now a little box. Inside, outside in, inside in, I don't know how to put it. The inside of the bag is here. All I've done is, oh, and one thing to say as well. In this, when I was sewing up the lining, I did go into the seam allowance. Can you see that? So I've stitched right the way up to virtually the top. And then the next thing is I've gone, if you want to go and press your seams with an iron, then you go for it. I am not going to do that because I don't feel like it. So there, and you can't make me. Sorry. So I'm just going to finger press them, but if you want to go and put the iron on it, you go for it. I'll just do that with my fingernail. Now I've got my line that I drew for my seam allowance all around, so I'm just going to fold it down on that line. And again, if you want to go and press that with the iron, that would be the correct way to do it. There we go, make it somewhat behave. And probably actually in the long run would be quicker than how I'm doing it. But, you know, makes life more interesting. This doesn't hold crease very well. Again, making excuses. A bad work person always blames their tools. Right, so that's ready to go. But before we put that inside the outer, we need to make, and I did sneakily attach some, the little loops for the, you know, the drawstrings to go through. Now in terms of sizing, sorry, I'm kicking something under the desk and it's making an annoying noise. I hope you can't pick it up. In terms of size, because your bag might not be the same size as mine, my little pieces, this is one that I haven't finished so I can show you, are 2 inches wide, 2 1/4-ish, 3 inches long. So the 3 inches long wouldn't change. They'll always be 3 inches long. But if your bag's bigger or smaller, then obviously your loops need to be bigger or smaller. So they're roughly, what are they? Slightly less than half the width of the side, because the side's 5 and they're 2. Something like that. Actually, when I've took the seam out, they're less. So yeah, they'll be about 1 3/4 inches to a 5 inch. So whatever proportion that is, you know, it doesn't really matter. They just need to be that-ish, sort of, about a third, somewhere between a third and a half. Stop rabbiting. They know what you mean. Move on. Okay. So you could, of course, just use one piece of something sturdy, and then you wouldn't have to do this, but my cloth's quite flimsy. So all I'm doing here, I'm not going to mess about with drawing lines and things, because it doesn't have to be, you know, but if you want to be exact, I'm just going to stitch up both sides. So I've already stitched up one long side, and now I'm going to just quickly whip along this other side. Just the sound of the needle going through the cloth. And me sniffing, sorry. That's gone a bit wibbly wobbly. It'll be alright. It'll all be alright. Right, there we are. So, and then when you've done that, and you need to make 4 of these. Snip. You need to turn it the right way out. Carefully, not to pull your stitches apart. And once you've turned it the right way out, you can call that done. But I am a bit obsessed with, you could press it again, obviously, if you want to. I'm a bit obsessed with stitching over seam allowances. I think it's again from the old quilting days when you stitched, you know, that shadow stitching where you stitch a 1/4 inch away from your seams or whatever. So I do this a lot. You see on here I've done some stitching. On that one I've done it. On this one I've done it. And even actually on both of these, inside the lining, there's some green there. Interesting. Inside the lining I stitched the seam allowances down, which you would do now before you put them together if you want to do that. But I won't make this video any longer than it already is. You see, I've done it there as well. I just like the look of it. You know, I've done it all around the inside of the lining. So if you want to do that to your lining part now before you assemble. It will be much easier. I am, however, going to do this little fellow because the other ones are all done, and because I, when I was stitching around my little side pieces of my outer, I couldn't find my gold. So I did this side red. This tab is going to go over here, opposite the red side, so I'm going to do his seams red. And in that way, I'm hoping that what was in fact, either you could call it a mistake if you wanted to be judgy, or you could call it me being too lazy to go looking for the right thread. Fred's my cat. But whatever you want to call it, it's now, for me, become a design opportunity. So I'm just going to, I'm not doing any back stitches, I'm getting a knot, or anything on the end because it's going to get stitched over again in a bit. So I'm just gonna, it's this, oh, I hear myself, oh for goodness sake, why are you being naughty? I hear myself saying it's the cloth and all that, and that's not nice of me, so I'm not going to say it. This is lovely, lovely modern sheet with a very high thread count, and I love sewing it. And I love it that my thread keeps getting a knot in. It's supposed to be all zen and slow stitchy. But this is why, as I've said before in other videos, that cloth is so important to me, because if it's not nice to stitch, then you don't enjoy it, you're fighting it. It's not the right cloth for the job. So I've done down one side. For example, upholstery cloth, I'm not a fan. I was given a lot of those sample books a little while ago by a neighbour of mine, very kind of her. But for hand stitching, it's just not something I like. So I'll have to think of something else to do with those. I have used some of them for journal covers and things like that. You know, glued them onto cardboard or whatever. So I'll just whip up the other side, and we're nearly there. And while I'm doing this, I'll just talk about the drawstrings. When we come to do the drawstrings, I have prepared mine earlier. I have done the cloth twining that I like doing. It's not mine, I don't own it. If you want to do cloth twine drawstrings and you don't know how to do it and you haven't watched my other video, I'll put a link in the description to that video. And you can go and see how to do that. When you make them, if you make them, otherwise you could use, I don't know, some cotton washing line type, you know, ropey stuff, or some ribbons, or so just some strips of cloth, or you know, that knitted cloth. The lady was asking about using knitted cloth for twine, and I haven't tried it. If you're watching, I'm sorry I can't remember your name or your tag, and you have tried it, do let me know. But that t-shirt string, which is just torn up bits of t-shirt, just that would work as well, anything like that. But I always like to do the twines. Right, anyway, he's done, so he's ready to join his friends. So I'm just going to fold him in half, like so, and then he will get tacked in there. Again, I'd stitch them on just roughly with some biggish running stitches. And I want him to go about 1/2 inch down from the edge. Again, you can measure if you want, and centrally. So I'm just going by eye on that line. If you really wanted to be accurate, you could fold it in half and, you know, make sure it's exact. What I do is just make sure he's roughly in the same spot by matching him to one of the others that I've already done. He's good enough. And then I'm going to, and he's gone all wibbly now. Wibbly wibbly. Get my needle, which is already threaded. Phew. And I'm staying quite well low down. So if you say this is 1/2 inch, which it is slightly more than, but if you say this is 1/2 inch, I'm going to stitch somewhere in the region of 1/4 inch from the bottom. And again, trying not to let my stitches go through to the other side. I haven't put a knot in it, never mind, I'll do a back stitch. We're only tacking. There we go, that's good enough. And now we're ready to put the two parts together. Snip that, make a knot. I don't need this again for the purpose of this video, but it's just a habit, which apparently I didn't do last time. Okay, so we've got the outer, and we've got the inner. And now, if it's important to you where your pocket is, you know, if the sides of your bag are different, then obviously, or if you've done more than one pocket, you know, you could have 4 pockets if you wanted. 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or none, it's up to you. So anyway, can I do this without getting it up in your face? Basically, you just push that down inside. Simple as. And then I start, sorry, just roll my sleeves up, they're falling down. I start somewhere on a side seam, so I've got, this is the side seam of my lining, and I'm going to match that up somewhat to the side seam of the bag. Do you see that? Just match them up level, and I'm going to pin. and then I'm going to go over, I'm going to not do anything, make sure the little loop's sticking out, over to the next side seam and match him up to the side seam of the outer, and pin, and pin, we're pinning again, come here, and third one, you got the idea by now. No, I'm using these little pins still. For this I should really be using bigger pins, but it doesn't matter. Right. So that's the 4 side seams pinned. And then, because then if you've been a little bit not quite accurate, like what I've probably been, those will be the most visible points that, you know, if things don't match. So then if you get hold of those two and pull them, hopefully, you see they do pretty much line up. So I'm just going to do 2 more pins either side of them. I'm not going to try and pin through that tab because that's thick there. I'm just going to do that and that. And so then I'm going to do that all the way around. Kind of, I'm fighting the inner desire all the time to be very, very accurate, to the point of stressing yourself out. If it stresses you out to not be accurate, then be accurate. Come on. I want you. I need you. There we go. So now I've pinned that all the way around, and you kind of get the idea now of how he's going to look when he's done. We're nearly there. And now the way I join them together is I just do, let me see more clearly on the outside, a whip stitch or an overcast stitch all the way around. There I've done it in grey, so it's quite hard to see. There I've done it in black. Can you see that more clearly? Just all the way around I've done a whip stitch. And when I come to the little tabbies, loopy things, I do the whip stitch on the inside through the tab and the lining, and then I come back and go around the outside as well, otherwise you'll have a, you know, an ugly gappy thing. So I'm going to go and do that. I'm going to do that with the blue. Maybe I'll leave the camera on and do a little bit just to start. I should just hide my knot somewhere in here. Tuck him in. Oops. Sorry. I keep making a rock and roll. I'm saying nothing about how difficult that sheet was to get through, except I just did. Okay, so you can do it as neatly or as rustically. Rustic is a word I use if I do something a bit, you know. I don't like this. This is, again, blaming my tools. Can't help myself. It was here and it was blue, but it's some generic, I don't know what kind of floss. Anyway, and by the way, talking of floss, this is 2 strands. I just like the stitching. I don't try and hide it for things like this. I like to see it. So I'm just whippy stitching around. Okay, so when you come to the tab, and it's lucky there are 4 of them, 4th time lucky because I've tried 3 times and something's gone wrong, so I've got some editing to do. Anyway, so this is our 4th chance, we have to get it right. So I've done my overcast up to this, just before the tab. So now I'm going to come through the tab. Go in there, needle. Just through this side of the tab and into the lining with my needle, and hope my thread behaves. And then I'm going to do some little overcast stitches, and I'm just through this side of the tab. I'm trying not to go right through to the other side, although it's not really a huge problem if it does, because you can, when you come around the other side, you can cover them up, you know, tuck them in, make sure they don't show if they bother you. Stained shot. I have a tendency to pull it closer and closer to me as I'm working, apparently, which is what happened the first time. I won't bore you with the litany of woes about all the things that happened the 2nd time and the 3rd time. I'm just hoping that the 4th time goes well. So what you could do, because you need to sew around the other side, is just sew around the other side and then finish off, you know, do your little back stitch and tie it and make a knot and pop your thread in and then come back here and start again. But rather than do that, now I'm at the end, I'm going to get my needle right through. There we go. So he comes out there, ready to do this little row of stitching. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side that I did on the other side. When I can get in. Let me in, let me in. I'm in. Again, just trying to stay in this side of the tab. And then when I get to the other side of this little tabby loop, whatever you want to call him, I'm calling it a tab, but it's more of a loop. Instead of just finishing off and starting again, my thread, you see that was slightly poking up, so I just pushed it in with my needle. What I'm going to do is sneak through the inside. All being well, cross your fingers for me. Cat hair, not helpful. Now you don't want to go through the loop because then your bit of thread will be in there and it'll catch on the drawstrings. So I'm going to come back through to the other side, kind of making a faux whip stitch in the process. And I'm going to come out there somewhere. Again, this is me, oh, the sun's come out, I hope you're not getting weird shadows. I have to pull the curtain across. 1 second, excuse me. Sorry about the noise. There we go. It's a shame because it's nice, but you don't want weird shadows. So I've come back through to the inside of the bag. Now where I want my needle to go is kind of under that line of stitching, but obviously I don't want it to come out at either side. So I'm just feeding it through and hoping, yeah, there it's through, and I can see that it's not come out anywhere where it shouldn't. A slightly longer needle would have been easier. There we go. There we go. There we go. Ta-da! Magic. So now I'm here ready to finish off my last bit. So let's go back in where I'm supposed to be, right next to the tab. Do you see that? Right next to the tab. And make a stitch right there as well. And I've done that either side of every tab, made sure I've got a stitch right next to them. And then I'll just do this last little bit. Get my big fat fingers out of the way so you can see what, well, it's quite hard to do it without my fingers in the way because I need my fingers, but you know what I mean. And then when I get back to where I started from, I can finish off. And you maybe have your own way of doing that when you're on the good side and you can't just hide it in the back of your work. What I do is I just kind of go in somewhere, and because I've got blue thread I'm going to come back so I'm in the blue rather than do it in the yellow, because then it will show less. Just, you know, just me overthinking things as usual. And then I'm just going to do a tiny little back stitch there and just make a little knot. Moving it towards me again, that's naughty. And then I'm going to go in with my needle again, in between the layers, between the stitches and between the layers. No, don't come out again till I tell you. Right. Make sure I'm not out anywhere I shouldn't be. And I'm going to come out there. And I'm going to give it a gentle tug to pop that little knot down inside. And then under a bit of tension, I'm being careful not to cut my cloth. I cut my thread and it's gone. So that's it, apart from, of course, the drawstrings. which I've prepared earlier. Now, now you need 2, and in terms of length, you need them to be the length of the perimeter of your bag, perimeter or circumference. So mine was 5, so 4 times 5 equals 20. And then you need plus maybe 6 more inches or so just for your knots and, you know, to be sure they're long enough. So, am I going to be able to get them through with my fingers, or will I need a pokey tool? You need to start at one diagonal corner with one of your strings, and you're going to go this way, this way, this way, this way, all the way back here. So it ends up like this. So I'll do that quickly, she said, grateful that she could edit if necessary, if it takes her hours. Do you know what, I am going to get a pokey tool. Excuse me 1 second. Pokey tool. Cocktail, no, it's not a cocktail stick. It's a chopstick, that's what it is. I'm going to pinch that and hold it still and push. There you go. Oh, bingo. Got so excited I bashed the chopstick against the camera stand. Come on, you know you want to. There we go. 2. Don't pull it right through, because then you'll have to start all over again. You'll be there forever going round and round. 3, come on. Nearly there. And finally, for this string, 4. Now that was the easy string, because the other string has to go through the same holes. And I've made them super duper long. I might shorten those, but I'll see. So then what I do is I get hold of the 2 knots and just make sure it's somewhat even, and just leave that dangling for now. And then your other cord needs to do exactly the same thing, but it needs to start and finish on the opposite diagonal corner, if that makes sense. So these 2 ends are here. So I'm going to start now from this opposite corner. And I'm just going to try and push that one that's already in there down out of the way a bit. And I'm going to get my pokey tool. And if it takes me ages, don't worry, I'll edit. So you don't have to suffer watching me struggle. Well, you can fast forward. But I'd like to show you the tricky bits and not hide them, because it feels more honest somehow. Show you my struggles. So that one's through. So if you pinch that one that's already in sort of down, as far as it'll go. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? No, I'm not. It's too pretty. I was contemplating trimming some of that away, but I like it, so it'd be a shame. You could, if you had a huge, great big safety pin or something like that, you could try and pin that through the end and see if that helped you. Nearly there. So push that one down in. And so this one's sort of laying on top of it. Get the knot in. Obviously, if you've got a ribbon or something, this has got a bit of structure to it, and I've got the knot to push against my cloth twine. If you're using a ribbon or something like that, then you would have to involve a safety pin in the proceedings. Last one. Last one. It's not that bad, you see, she said, getting stuck. Come on. There we go. There he is. I see him. Right. So now I've got 2 here and 2 here. See that? And then, ta-da! And there you've got your little drawstring. And then you can, if you would like, if I just undo it again, tie these 2 ends together. I just do a knot. just in case you pull a bit, you know, violently one day and you pull them out, I don't know. So then you have this kind of affair. And if neither of these have got beads on, I've been thinking about beads because I've run out of my lovely dread beads. Well, they're all on things, they're all used in various places. And I have an idea. I'm not going to say any more. Keep a cliffhanger. So there might be coming soon a video about beads and cloth and things like that. So yeah, so I've done that, so they're safe and secure. And now he closes and he opens, and that's him inside and his little pocket, and that's him outside and his tie-dyed bottom. And I hope you enjoyed that, and if I haven't covered anything or you have any questions, do feel free to ask me in the comments. I love reading your comments. I'm overwhelmed with the number of lovely comments, so thank you so much. And next up will be the biscornu, next week sometime, and the observant people among you will notice that he now has a saucer, so I'll show you that as well. But meanwhile, while I go and get on with that, hope you enjoy, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more cloth tales. Thank you, bye bye.